We want to bring in our next guest. First, we want to go to Gautam Mukunda. He's at Yale School of Management, but he's also a columnist here with Bloomberg. And on set, we have Politico's New York Playbook co-author Madison Fernandez. And I just want to ask the two of you, as more Democratic Socialists are entering the primaries nationwide, how big is the Democratic tent? Is there room for both centrists and socialists, or is there going to be a family breakup, a party break, some sort of fight here at some point? Madison, let's start with you, since you did come in on a Sunday. Not that we don't love all of our other guests, but you know.
I mean, Democrats would certainly love to say that they're a big tent, and they do say that. But I think you're going to see over the coming months, it is going to be a challenge about how they're going to work with all these priorities together. I mean, you have a group of moderate Democrats right now who are trying to say, we don't support socialism, but we do want to work together. And, you know, I was speaking with Congressman Tom Suozzi last week as he's part of this effort, and I asked, you know, what are you going to do to make sure that the whole party doesn't just devolve into chaos? Because the reality is Democrats do want to stay on message and fight against Trump, and they don't want to be distracted by fighting with each other. And, you know, he pointed to the Freedom Caucus on the other side. He's like, we don't want that to happen. So I think that there's a lot at stake here for Democrats, and they are going to have to figure out how to work together.
Echoing what we heard from Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, yesterday, his optimism that the tent could be big enough. Gautam Mukunda, let me turn to you on this very same point. And I guess a lot of difficulty here is maybe in the name itself. And of course, the Democratic Party is a party, as the name implies. Democratic Socialists are not. It's a group of elected officials and voters. How much does that nuance matter? How awkward is the fit in national politics?
So I think it's going to get pretty awkward in some cases. I mean, dissolving into chaos is the Democratic Party's base state, so I think they're all used to that. That's their norm. But I think you can make some distinctions, right? So it's not that hard for most Democrats to work with AOC or with Mayor Mamdani. Chevalier, this new candidate out in New York, who's going to be in Congress, her sort of radicalism and her record of statements on Twitter and things like that is such that it's going to be much, much more difficult for Democrats to embrace her. But I do think that might actually create an opportunity for some, where if we go back to the 1990s, which I know are, like the dawn of time for many of us, where Bill Clinton really separated himself out from the crowd by, as they said, what they called his sister soldier moment, by criticizing people on his left. It wouldn't surprise me to see Democratic candidates, as they start to maneuver for 2028 or even 2026, thinking very seriously about separating themselves from the DSA and actually gaining some political advantages from that.
Gautam, you're not going to be allowed back if you're going to be talking about the 1990s being so far away. I like to live under the delusion that that was only like 10 years ago. Jeff Mason, I do want to ask you, it seems like the White House wasted no time at all on seizing on this line of attack, kind of conflating socialism and communism, which I learned recently talking to some fairly educated friends. A lot of people don't really know or understand the difference and don't really care the difference between. Is the White House going to use that to their advantage? And I think we're already seeing it a little bit, including the president's remarks.
For sure. And I think you're also right about that distinction, that's not a distinction that many Americans make. Communism, apropos the 90s, Christina.
Hey now, careful.
I also grew up in the 80s, and that communism in the 80s in particular was a scary word, and it is absolutely connected to the Cold War and to the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union and all of those things that certainly Americans of a certain age associate with negativity. But I think the others were right to note that as far as Democratic Socialists are concerned, there are some high-profile Democratic Socialists who are governing right now and finding a way to do it with other Democrats, certainly including the mayor of New York. I would add Bernie Sanders to that list, a very, very successful senator who came pretty darn close to becoming the Democratic nominee for president. At least once, and Democrats found a way to work with him, and that doesn't mean that there aren't fissures in the party. There absolutely are, and the reasons for those fissures are vast, and it underscores some problems broadly for the party going into the midterm elections as they try to conquer Republicans. But is it what President Trump is portraying? No, it's not. And that is also part of their job, is to counteract some of that rhetoric, which he is, I think, as you rightly said, Christina, so far pretty successfully wielding against them.
Madison, let me pick up on what Jeff was talking about there, the role of Mayor Mamdani here in New York. And as you've noted in the New York playbook, he's had a lot of high-profile phone calls in recent days with Kamala Harris, the former presidential nominee, with Gavin Newsom, who could be the Democrats' nominee going forward here. What does that say to you, their willingness to engage with him about how they see him and the role that he's playing in the conversation that we're talking about?
It speaks to an acknowledgement that this is the path forward that brings in more voters who are frustrated with the establishment and perhaps disillusioned with politics, disillusioned with the Democratic Party. And when you have someone so popular like Mayor Mamdani, why wouldn't you reach out to him to try to get him on board, get his voters on board, especially when you see the victories he had in the New York primaries? Just something else I wanted to respond to on countering this rhetoric. I think that for some of these more established politicians, that's easier. For your AOCs, for even your Mamdanis right now, because he, skyrocketed since coming into office. Yes, exactly. But some of these newer officials, like Darelisa Villa Chevalier, who we mentioned before, she had to come out and say, "I am not a communist. I am a democratic socialist," and that's just going to be more difficult for some of these newer folks who don't have a high name ID, who people don't know, when you have this rhetoric coming from the Republican side. Look at these communists. So they have to spend more time countering that. And that could be frustrating when you're just trying to get into Congress, do your job.
Especially at a time when Democrats felt they really did have the upper hand with messaging, given the unpopularity of the war, the tenuous nature of the U.S. economy going into the midterms. We now have to have this whole other discussion. Gautam, I want to ask you, I grew up in Colorado, one of the other places we're seeing some Democratic Socialist candidates, and I reached out to some friends online and just said, look, if you're an independent and you vote one way or the other, would you vote for someone who's self-ID'd as a Democratic Socialist? And I thought the responses were very interesting, because a lot of more independent folks said absolutely not, it was a deal breaker. Some more on the liberal side said I would only vote for somebody who said Democratic Socialist. And then I got a couple of responses that said, can we just stop putting labels on people and vote based on the issues? But that is a lot to navigate for voters. Do you think there is a way where this could be a benefit to the party, given unhappiness with incumbency and with what's going on right now? Or is it just going to muddy the waters because voters' attention spans are short and November's right around the corner?
Yeah, November's coming up, and I think we should split this up into a few different things, right? So the DSA phenomenon seems to be largely about deep blue urban areas, particularly New York, right? They had Kuros win in Colorado, but it doesn't seem likely they have the same level of strength here. What we saw in Colorado, other than Kuros, was just a profound anti-incumbent push from Democratic voters who looked at their establishment and said, you had one job. You had one job. Your one job was to beat Donald Trump, and you failed. And we will take anyone over the people who failed at that one and only task. And that, I think, is how you see Weezer beat Bennett. And on the flip side, in Colorado, they have this huge advantage where the Republican nominee looks like it's going to be, it's Marks, who, I'm trying to put this in a, diplomatic way. If you believe his own testimony about his life is, either delusional or a murderer, one of those two things kind of has to be true. So that really changes the dynamic in some pretty profound ways in state by state when you're running against someone like that.
Madison, I'll turn to you lastly here just on this issue. I mentioned the Steve Bannon interview, and maybe you can just kind of synthesize what he had to say in that conversation with Politico. Does he feel like Republicans are equipped to, yes, the president clearly feels like he is able to push back on this. Do Republicans largely have a unified message on this yet?
I mean, I think on both sides, there's going to be work to do to come there with a unified message. I mean, you're already seeing Republicans in recent weeks attacking Democrats on this front, but when there are a lot of concerns about the economy, about rising gas prices, about everything, it's going to be interesting to see if voters are making the connection that President Trump is trying to make, because I think a lot of what he's saying speaks to the concerns, the economic insecurity. But if they're running around saying, look at all these socialists, look at all these communists, I think there has to be another step there that I'm not sure we're there yet.